A dismembered country. The Treaty of Trianon and the aftermath, 1919 to 1921. The magnificent Palace of Versailles, the seat of France's Louis XIV, the Sun King, attracts millions of tourists each year. Enthusiastic travelers can also explore its stunning gardens, which are home to the Grand Trianon Palace, originally built as a royal retreat. When Hungarian tourists approach the estate, however, they do so with a heavy heart. The word Trianon evokes one of the most tragic events in Hungarian history, the severe territorial losses of the historic Hungarian state and the tragic consequences that would affect millions. It was in this palace that on June 4, 1920, the delegates of Hungary were forced to sign a peace treaty that ended the war. How does this peace treaty, signed a century ago, affect the everyday lives of Hungarians today? What precipitated the decision to carve up the country so extensively? What were the dire consequences of such unprecedented conditions for peace? Trianon. A peace dictate or peace treaty. It was in January 1919, in Versailles near Paris, that the peace conference concluding the First World War convened. Decisions were made by the four great powers: the United States, Great Britain, France, and Italy. The winning powers set up committees of experts to discuss the key issues, especially around territorial changes. The peace treaty affecting Hungary focused on the dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian Monarchy and the fragmentation of the Kingdom of Hungary. The Czech, Romanian, and Serbian leaders were also allowed to present their views during the decision-making process. Aware that they had a unique opportunity to expand the territories of their countries, their bias led to their potentially misleading contributions in favor of their own agendas. The Czechs demanded the Danube River as their border, cutting through Hungarian ethnic territories in order to gain a trade route. They also argued for a connection to the South Slavic state across the Trans-Danubian region. The Romanians demanded the entire territory of Transylvania, including strategically important railway lines, while the South Slavs wanted the fertile lands of the Banat region, despite the majority of the population being ethnic Hungarians. In principle, the victorious powers emphasized the importance of national self-determination and the need to consider ethnic factors in deciding new borders. In reality, these factors were often overridden in the practical decision-making process. It was not the ethnic, but economic, infrastructural, and strategic needs of the future states of Czechoslovakia, Romania, and the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes that was prioritized. In the debates among the victors, it was chiefly the Americans who insisted on fair ethnic borders. But when these considerations were disregarded during negotiations, they withdrew from the peace talks in December 1919. The United States would not ratify the Treaty of Trianon. Thus, the final decisions were made by British Prime Minister Lloyd George and French Prime Minister Clemenceau. There were no peace negotiations between the winners and losers in any traditional sense. Hungarians had no say in drafting the terms, which is why many in Hungary today still regard Trianon as a peace dictate rather than a peace treaty. The Hungarian delegation was invited to the peace conference to accept the terms imposed upon them in January 1920. The leader of the delegation, Count Albert Apponyi, referred to U.S. President Woodrow Wilson's principle of national self-determination and requested a referendum in those territories detached from Hungary. He argued that no group of human beings, no part of the population of any state, should be placed against their will or without being asked, like a herd of cattle, under the jurisdiction of a foreign state. Apponyi also presented the so-called Red Map, which accurately reflected the ethnic realities of the Carpathian Basin. This momentarily unsettled the British Prime Minister, but the French insisted on maintaining previous decisions. For the British, Hungary was not of great importance. The terms of the peace treaty. The treaty included 364 articles which regulated numerous factors. It imposed reparation obligations and radically curtailed Hungary's military power, leaving the country exposed to neighboring states. However, the most crucial issue was territorial changes. Of Hungary's 282,000 square kilometers, only 93,000 remained in Hungarian hands, meaning 2/3 of the country was annexed to neighboring nations. The 103,000 square kilometers of land alone that went to Romania was larger than what was left of Hungary. The neighboring countries of Czechoslovakia, the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes, later known as Yugoslavia, and even Austria also acquired territories from Hungary. The country's only seaport, Fiume, was occupied, then annexed by the Italians. As a result, Hungary lost 60% of its 18 million population. Alongside those areas predominantly inhabited by ethnic Magyars, the historically Hungarian Székely land, as well as the ethnically homogeneous Hungarian population on the borders, were annexed to neighboring countries. Subsequently, around 3.3 million Hungarians, a third of all Hungarians living in the Carpathian Basin, found themselves under foreign rule. The causes behind the treaty. Principles and reality. The First World War caused immense bloodshed and suffering for Europeans. It's not surprising that the victorious powers invoked the ancient principle of vae victis, or woe to the conquered, identifying the losers as responsible for the war. In doing so, they lent a moral dimension to their victory. Good had triumphed over evil. In his address, Oponyi saw little point in disputing this. Rather, he posed the question that if territorial measures were part of the punishment, should they not be proportionate to the degree of complicity? While Hungary was deprived of 67% of its territory, Germany, similarly defeated, had only 13% of its territory removed, and Bulgaria just 8%. As such, it seems that Hungary's significant loss of territory was not proportionate to the extent of its responsibility for the war. The principle of national self-determination formed a key role in President Wilson's peace program. The Austro-Hungarian Monarchy, and within it Hungary, was a multi-ethnic country. For many centuries, Hungarians and other nationalities lived together peacefully within Hungary's borders. However, the rise of nationalism in the 19th century put an end to this harmony. Romanians and Serbs in particular showed an increased desire to belong to their respective mother countries. In fact, the Serbs advocated the formation of a South Slavic state, Yugoslavia, whilst the Czechs proposed a new state with the Slovaks. As the war progressed, the Entente powers, chiefly England and France, supported these aspirations to weaken a hostile Austria-Hungary. Following their victory, they cited the principle of national self-determination to fulfill these desires. In his speech, Oponyi proposed the reasonable solution of referendums to uphold the principle of self-determination. His suggestions were rejected by the Entente powers, who argued that asking the opinion of the population was pointless, since the outcome would undoubtedly be the same as the terms already established in the treaty. However, the Entente didn't exclude the possibility of referendums because they were confident in the result, as they'd stated, but quite the opposite. They were aware that the outcome would have cast doubt on their decisions. In some of the annexed territories, the new rulers were in the minority. In the territory attached to Czechoslovakia, alongside a negligible number of Czechs, only 46% of the population were Slovaks. In the territories attached to the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes, the three nationalities combined did not make up more than 38% of the entire population. The Hungarian government succeeded in enforcing a referendum in only one small territory in 1921, and, not surprisingly, the outcome did not align with the wishes of the Entente powers. In the referendum of Sopron, a town with a Hungarian-German ethnic composition of 50% on each side, 72% voted in favor of belonging to the Kingdom of Hungary, rejecting the Treaty of Trianon and annexation to Austria. This sparked great joy nationwide, and from then on, Sopron would proudly bear the title of Most Loyal City. In practice, the victorious powers didn't actually apply the ethnic principle, not even where it would have been wholly justified. Regions that were entirely or predominantly Hungarian were still transferred to Czechoslovakia, Romania, and the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes along the borders of a heavily truncated Hungary. The most shocking case was the territory of Csolókhoz, a well-defined Hungarian island populated by only 500 Slovaks, but more than 121,500 Hungarians and 3,000 Germans. Thus, it was annexed to Czechoslovakia even though less than 0.5% of the population belonged to the major ethnicity that was to form the new nation-state. In practice, the ethnic principle of national self-determination was all but disregarded. Instead of the one multi-ethnic Austria-Hungary, the Entente powers had managed to create several smaller but similarly multi-ethnic states. But what then motivated the peacemaking powers? Among the decision-makers, it was France that had a particular interest in determining the details of a Central European peace settlement. The French envisioned a zone, referred to at the time as a cordon sanitaire, to be created from the successor states of the Austro-Hungarian Monarchy, namely Czechoslovakia, Romania, and the Kingdom of the Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. This zone, together with Poland, was seen as a way to halt German imperialism and restrain Russian Bolshevism. These countries owed their existence to the Entente powers, and mainly to France, thus ensuring French hegemony in the region. The European consequences. Unsurprisingly, a peace treaty is generally considered ideal if it brings about lasting peace. By this benchmark, the Paris peace treaties proved to be inadequate. Less than 2 decades later, the states of Europe found themselves embroiled in another deadly war. The fragmentation of the Austro-Hungarian Empire disrupted the balance of power in Central Eastern Europe. A power vacuum emerged, attracting the expansionist ambitions of the neighboring 2 great powers, Germany and Russia. The smaller states created from the dissolution of the empire were later unable to withstand the destructive rule and conquests of Nazi Germany or the Communist Soviet Union. Peace didn't ease ethnic grievances either. However, now it wasn't just the Romanians, Serbs and Czechs complaining of ethnic oppression, but Germans, Hungarians and Croats too. Opposition amongst the nations of the region eventually led to severe atrocities and ethnic cleansing during World War II. Consequences in the Carpathian Basin. With the Treaty of Trianon, 3.3 million Hungarians found themselves beyond Hungarian borders, with their former mother countries unable to support them in such a confrontational international climate. As a result, they were exposed to the homogenizing efforts of neighboring states. They were stripped of their citizenship, their use of the Hungarian language was severely restricted, many lost their jobs, and landowners lost a significant portion of their properties. Around 400,000 Hungarians, mostly from the middle classes, arrived in Hungary as refugees and lived for many years in extreme hardship. To prevent any revision of the peace treaty, the successor states enforced increased assimilation and resettlement of the population. Although the treaty formally guaranteed minority rights, there was no talk of territorial autonomy, and Hungarian language education was severely repressed. As a result, over the past 100 years, the ethnic maps of these countries were transformed. In 1920, the Hungarian population of the Transylvanian city of Kolozsvár amounted to 82%. Today, it barely reaches 15%. Close to the Hungarian border, Kass's Hungarian population in 1910 was 75%, whereas today it is just 2.5%. In Transylvania, where for 8 centuries hundreds of thousands of Germans lived under the rule of the Kingdom of Hungary and the Principality of Transylvania, only a fraction have remained. For Hungarians beyond the borders, there was another significant problem, a so-called brain drain. The leading intellectual classes who'd lost their jobs or estates during the land reforms were forced to leave. Consequently, Hungarian communities in the successor states were left without an educated intellectual class. In this challenging situation, the churches and the most determined writers and politicians played a pivotal role in preserving Hungarian culture, despite exceedingly unfavorable circumstances. While those living beyond the borders, subjugated and deprived of their rights, felt deep despair, the majority of Hungarians living in Hungary felt these changes akin to a personal trauma, a sense of having been robbed. The main reason for this lay in the undeniable injustice of the peace settlement. Hungary's territory was carved up, theoretically based on the ethnic principle, yet in practice, this principle was severely violated to the detriment of the Hungarian population and to the benefit of the decision-makers. There was a general consensus among Hungarians that they couldn't accept this injustice. Inevitably, it became the guiding principle in politics between the two wars, and eventually, tragically, led Hungary into the arms of Germany, also dissatisfied with the post-World War I peace settlements. Although the Treaty of Trianon is over a century old, it continues to influence the lives, opinions, and relationships of Hungarians and their neighbors. Hungarian politicians gave up the goal of restoring pre-Trianon Hungary some 75 years ago. Nevertheless, Hungarians still look back with nostalgia on the 1,000 years when the Kingdom of Hungary was bordered by the Carpathian Mountains. It is with a heavy heart that they see the land, buildings, and Hungarian monuments that ended up beyond the borders, while continuing to support and preserve the culture of Hungarians living there. Trianon also generated political skepticism amongst Hungarians, who rarely take at face value the moral platitudes and lofty principles expressed in international relations, often viewing them as a cover to mask the hidden interests of the great powers. In recent decades, the relationship between Hungarians and their neighbors has been characterized by peaceful cooperation. Occasionally, however, disputes arise when Hungarians are asked to forget Trianon or acknowledge that the peace treaty was the best possible solution. Both are impossible.